You know that moment when someone asks about your childhood and your mind goes strangely quiet? Not blank, just unfocused. Like the memories exist, but they're filed under responsibility instead of play. You can recall what needed to be done, who needed help, what went wrong. But the feeling of simply being a kid feels harder to access. There's a certain kind of person who was described as so mature for their age. The dependable one, the calm one, the one adults didn't have to worry about. It sounded like praise, and maybe it was. But sometimes that maturity wasn't personality, it was adaptation. People often misunderstand this kind of early strength. They assume it means you were naturally independent, naturally composed, naturally less needy than other children. The truth is quieter than that. When a child grows up too fast, it's rarely because they wanted to. It's usually because something in their environment required it. Not always something dramatic. Sometimes it was subtle. A parent who was overwhelmed. A household where emotions ran high. Expectations that arrived earlier than they should have. And the child adjusted. If you found this relatable, drop a like and subscribe to join the Elite Echoes community. Psychology has a word for one version of this: parentification. It describes a role reversal where a child begins to carry emotional or practical responsibilities that typically belong to adults. Researcher Dr. Lisa Hooper and others have shown that these children often appear exceptionally capable. They problem solve well. They regulate others' emotions. They take initiative. From the outside, it looks like maturity. Inside the nervous system, it's often hypervigilance. When the brain senses unpredictability, it adapts. The amygdala becomes more alert to shifts in tone and mood. The stress response activates more easily. Neural pathways associated with planning and monitoring the environment strengthen early. The body learns that staying one step ahead reduces risk. For a developing child, this isn't a choice. It's intelligence in action. If you grew up this way, you probably became very good at reading the room. You could tell who was upset before they said a word. You sensed tension before it escalated. You learned which parts of yourself to minimize so things would stay stable. That wasn't because you lacked personality, it was because stability mattered more than self-expression. Over time, this becomes an internal operating system. You don't think, I need to manage this. You just do. You anticipate problems, you prepare, you hold things together. Responsibility feels normal. Rest feels slightly unfamiliar. And here's the part that's rarely explained correctly. The nervous system doesn't automatically update just because circumstances change. Even in adulthood, even in relatively safe environments, your body may still behave as if it's on call. You might feel uneasy when you're not being useful. You might struggle to ask for help without rehearsing it internally 10 times. You might default to being the strong one in relationships, not because you don't trust others, but because your system learned early that being dependable was how connection was maintained. Attachment research shows that children will reorganize themselves to preserve closeness. If love felt conditional on being helpful, calm, or undemanding, then those traits became strategies. They worked. They protected you. And strategies that work tend to stick. There's also a paradox here. Children who grow up too fast often become adults who can handle enormous pressure. Crisis doesn't rattle you the way it rattles others. You're steady, resourceful, capable. But the small, vulnerable moments can feel harder. Letting someone take care of you, admitting you're overwhelmed, being playful without a purpose. Those states can feel oddly exposed. It's not weakness, it's unfamiliar territory. Another layer people don't talk about is the relationship between usefulness and worth. When responsibility arrives early, identity can quietly attach itself to performance. You become the reliable one, the fixer, the mediator. Being needed can start to feel like being loved, and if being needed equals connection, then slowing down or stepping back can feel risky. There may be a subtle fear that if you're not contributing, stabilizing, or achieving, you might become invisible. This doesn't mean every driven or competent person grew up too fast. And it doesn't mean that growing up slowly is somehow superior. Different nervous systems adapt to different environments. There is no moral ranking here. But if you recognize yourself in this pattern, it makes sense. It makes sense that you feel responsible for things that aren't fully yours. It makes sense that unpredictability unsettles you more than it seems to unsettle others. It makes sense that you sometimes feel older than your peers and, at the same time, strangely younger in certain emotional spaces, because part of you skipped a stage, or maybe more accurately, postponed it. When development is accelerated in one area, it often gets deferred in another. The competence grows quickly, the softness waits. And that softness doesn't disappear, it just goes quiet. There may be moments, even now, when you feel an unexpected wave of fatigue. Not just physical tiredness, but something deeper, a kind of bone level exhaustion. That can happen when a nervous system has been bracing for years, when vigilance has been the background setting since childhood. The body keeps that history, but it also remains capable of learning new patterns. Safety experienced consistently can begin to lower the volume on constant alertness. Being around people who don't require you to perform stability can feel disorienting at first, sometimes even uncomfortable, but over time, the nervous system notices. It updates slowly. You might start to feel what it's like to exist without managing, to speak without scanning, to rest without earning it. And none of this erases the strength you developed. That strength is real. The perceptiveness, the resilience, the capacity to hold complexity, those are not illusions. They're adaptations that once protected you. The difference now is that protection doesn't have to be your only mode. If you grew up too fast, there's nothing defective about you. Your system did exactly what it was designed to do. It adapted to preserve connection and stability. It kept you functional. It kept you needed. It kept you safe in the ways it could. Understanding that doesn't rewrite the past, but it can soften how you interpret yourself in the present. You were not too serious, not too sensitive, not too much. You were responsive to your environment, and perhaps there's space now to respond to yourself with the same attentiveness you once gave everyone else. If this reflection feels quietly familiar, there are other patterns that often travel alongside it, in relationships, in ambition, in the way you experience rest and closeness. Sometimes recognizing the origin of a pattern is the first time it loosens its grip, and sometimes that recognition is enough to begin experiencing yourself a little differently.